Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how is it going?
Tony, on Monday night, you referenced one of the great past, just little tiny microcosms of the college football internet that I think is long gone and probably long forgotten or never known by a lot of our listenership. I propose that we spend this entire show trying to explain the phenomenon of Chesterton Lep to our audience. Your thoughts?
We would need more than just a 30 or 60-minute show to totally explain Chesterton Lep and also to explain it properly and to get people to be like, who cares? Because you really got to get into why Chesterton Lep matters and who he was. And it's hard to convey that over a vocal medium like a podcast. You certainly need slides. You need something visual. So I guess that would be up to you on the YouTube side to throw in some Chesterton Lep and to, I guess, explain real quickly. Chesterton Lep, back in the mid 2000s, a long time ago, far, far, far away, a Notre Dame fan on the internet, of which there were many, and they're all classy people, just totally classy. But he would do Photoshops that, let's see, okay, this is 2005. Say like Photoshops that your 60-year-old uncle would do, along with forwarding all of these joke emails.
Forward. Charlie Weiss returned to glory. Yes, exactly. That was it. Yeah.
And they're just really not great Photoshops and very loving of Notre Dame, loving of Charlie Weiss, which, as we know now, is a hilarious thing in itself. But again, this is Chesterton Lep, who passed away, I believe, in 2010. So R.I.P. Chet Lep. But thank you for bringing him up, Tom. And as you mentioned, I mentioned him in a group text, knowing that only Tom would remember Chesterton Lep, and so we'll pour out some for him today.
Yeah, that was one of these fantastic, you kind of had to be there moments of the college football internet. Like, there's a certain subsection of both enough of a college football diehard and also online enough to really appreciate the majesty of it. But there was Chesterton Lep who you called them Photoshop. I think it was more like Microsoft Paint, like that level, like MS Paint level editing. They were all, it was like, the bit basically was, I can't quite tell if this person is serious or not. And he was extremely serious. And it was so over the top pro Notre Dame, but also so terribly executed that it was one of my favorite things on the internet. The only thing that I think approaches it in the college football graphics sphere is the probably 2010 to 2012-ish era University of Florida social media. I think Ohio State fans take their spectacular social media team for granted. And it's like, wow, this is really slickly produced. If you go back and Google the hashtag, and this is a hashtag, and it's about 47 letters long. So it's come play WR for FOR, the Joker. It was Joker Phillips, the former University of Kentucky head coach, who was then the wide receiver coach for Florida. Hashtag come play wide receiver for the Joker. And it was just a bunch of if you had never taken any training on any kind of photo editing software, and you were just pasting Joker Phillips's head on stuff. I think there was one that was a Harry Potter one where it was, they're riding brooms around the field. I think there was one where he was the Joker from Batman. And it was just the Joker from Batman standing in the swamp. And come play wide receiver for the Joker. Oh, okay, I'm sold. You have yes. Other schools talk about the 40-year plan. Not the next 40 years, not just this next 4, or preparing me for the NFL. But you, friends, I will get to play Quidditch if I come play for Joker Phillips at Florida. Just, I have a feeling if you search that, I haven't looked at it on Twitter in probably 8 years, but if you search that, it is probably the original artwork, and me tweeting about it once every about 5 years as I remember it, and I go, oh, that was the best. And that's probably all you're going to find, but that's okay. It is one of the most beautiful, stupid college football things. And if I love one thing, it is beautiful, stupid college football things.
That is true. And really, Like if you look at those pictures, that's not like an advancement of what Chesterton Lep would do. It was just like it's that same genre. It's I don't know, post expressionism, maybe we could call it.
It's it is the spiritual successor to Chesterton Lep. Chesterton Lep with a .edu email account. That was about it. That was about the only difference. And some of those post Urban Meyer Florida teams were about like the mid 2000s Notre Dame team. So yeah, there's definitely a theme building there.
Tom, let's get the show started. What do you say?
Well, let's see how fast I can type this extremely long hashtag and see.
When
the
you
last
said
time.
you should Google it, I was like, well, if it's a hashtag, Tom, why don't you just punch it into Twitter?
That sounds like a thing. Yeah, more people are using it, but they're generally using it just on pictures of alligators, which is, that's okay. There's not very many. Not very many here, but
I'm wondering, what kind of a recruiting tool is Harry Potter for high school wide receivers that are looking to play Power 5 football?
Yes, here's one. Come join the fun. Come play wide receiver for the Joker, and it's just literally a picture of the Joker, not even Joker Phillips, and like 4 masks that look like the guys, the stupid accomplices for the Joker who get murdered 3 seconds into the bank robbery. It's like I don't know that that's something I would be all that interested in doing, but it says, come join the fun, come play wide receiver for the Joker. It's like, all right, well, I guess. I guess getting murdered in a bank robbery and playing for a Will Muschamp team was about the same thing. It's about the same level of fun. So sure, I guess so.
Was Dave Bliss the recruiting director there? That's a bit dark.
No. It's not just a bit dark. That's quite dark.
Quite dark. But yeah, you don't need nowadays. You need to be a little bit more nuanced and have talent to be able to do some of these photoshopping. Back then, you just use the circle tool, or you just cut it out, and maybe it's just construction paper. I think that's about the level that we're talking about. But Tom, speaking of recruiting departments and the recruiting successes and failures, bad news this week for the Buckeyes. Dasan McCullough, decommitted, top 50 guy, an athlete, 6'5", listed at 6'5", 220. I just want to clarify, nobody listed at 6'5" on a recruiting site is actually 6'5". They're all 6'4" at best, especially if they are considered to be a possible safety. There's no such thing as a 6'5" safety. So at best, you're 6'3" and 5/8", and even then, you're going to end up at linebacker. But with Dasan McCullough, who his dad, obviously, Dylan McCullough, the former Chiefs running backs coach, goes to Indiana. And so immediately that threw everybody into, he's going to, is Dasan McCullough going to decommit? And for a while, it was like, no. And then his older brother transfers there from Miami, and his younger brother commits to Indiana, 2023, Dan McCullough. And so then it's like, well, how can you have the one holdout? And Tom, you went into it a little bit on the Morning Scoop with the McCullough family story, which is an incredible story. And when you factor that into account, it's certainly not a surprise that Dasan McCullough is choosing to be with his father rather than his friends, basically.
Well, and I'll share a little bit of the story. You can hear the full story on the Morning Scoop episode on Tuesday morning that I did with Mark Givler, as Tony mentioned. The short version is it is the most remarkable story you have ever read about any football player in history. Dylan McCullough, who is Dasan's dad, grew up. He was adopted at like 2 weeks old. Never knew his birth mother. Never knew his birth father. Grew up, turned into a pretty good football player. Got recruited to play at Miami University. His position coach was a guy named Sherman Smith, and he played for Sherman Smith for a year. And then Sherman Smith went off to another job, I think, at Illinois. And but continued to be sort of a mentor for him, gave him a job, helped set him up with, I think, the Seahawks at some point in the NFL for some kind of a coaching position to help start his coaching career. And, was just this like wonderful mentor, good force for good in his life. And, years later, when he was getting a little older, Dassan McCullough decided he wanted to go find his birth parents, and was able to track down his birth mother. His birth mother had never told anyone who his father was, and had never told the father that she was having a baby. And then told, so McCullough says, okay, well, what's his name? And the woman says, Sherman Smith. And it turns out his birth father was his position coach at Miami University and had been this like mentor in his life for years. And they had this wonderful connection and this close friendship. And neither of them had any idea that the other one existed. The father didn't know he had a son. The son didn't know who his father was. And so it just turned into this incredible, this incredible story. And, I don't want to psychoanalyze anyone here. That's not something I'm necessarily qualified to do. But, it's not that hard to see the guy who grew up without a father wanting to be a fantastic father for his kids and really close, and he is by all accounts like a fantastically, wonderfully involved father with all three of his kids. And, the fact that his college position coach was such an important figure in his life and was such a fantastic influence in his life, wanting to kind of be that for his own kids too. Like, yeah, like you look at that, you hear that story, and I think a lot of people's initial reaction without knowing that background is, well, why the heck would you leave Ohio State to go play for Indiana? And it's like, okay, on the surface, that's an extremely fair question to ask. But once you hear the story, it's like, okay, so that is why you would leave Ohio State to go play for Indiana. Like, yep. If you know that story and you cannot just say like, best of luck, man. I hope you guys have a fantastic time together, being together, 3-4 years of you guys all playing together and getting to play for your, play all together with your dad and all that. Like that should be your reaction there. It's a problem for Ohio State and on the field for reasons we can talk about in a minute, but just personally and off the field, like you have to feel wonderful for that family. Like that is just a really cool story.
Yeah, and Dalen, the coach, is what was Kevin Wilson's running backs coach at Indiana a few years back, and then he moved on and has come back. And in terms of on the field, I don't know what he would have become or what he's going to become, because he's listed at 6'5", 220. So let's say he's 6'4", 220. Is he a linebacker? Is he I think people believe he'll also grow into a defensive end. I don't think he's a safety. Is he a hybrid guy? Maybe. I go back to one of the most incredible highlights I've ever seen from a high school kid, which is his junior year. He is rushing from the edge. And so he rushes the quarterback. The quarterback rolls away from him. So he backtracks and runs in the same direction, but also drops back into coverage and ends up intercepting a pass like 20 yards downfield. So there's a guy who rushes like 7 yards upfield and then sees I'm not going to get to the quarterback. So he drops back into coverage and probably runs like 50 yards for an interception in the span of time a quarterback is just rolling out looking for somebody to throw to. So that's the kind of athlete we're talking about. But I don't know where he ends up at Ohio State. And so because of that, I don't know how you replace that, because nobody does what he does, but I don't know that there's a spot for what he does, I guess is what I'm saying.
The closest comp on last year's team sounds like it was probably Baron Browning, where it's like an outside linebacker, not a bullet kind of hybrid, but an outside linebacker who also might be a pass rusher, where, Baron Browning would sometimes be more of like a pass rushing linebacker or even kind of almost a hybrid defensive end in a lot of ways. That sounds like kind of the role they were envisioning for him. And, when he decommitted, it was like, okay, well, let's just, everyone's reaction was just kind of like, well, let's just go get another linebacker. What about Sean Murphy? And Sean Murphy is not that type of linebacker. That's a different, they both play linebacker, but those are very different types of linebackers. If you're, the kind of old school traditional Mike linebacker, like that's Sean Murphy. That is very much not what Dasan McCullough did or what Dasan McCullough was going to bring to this class. And the challenge for Ohio State now is they have thought they had Gabe Powers, CJ Hicks, and Dasan McCullough committed for a long time. McCullough committed last summer, I think sometime. I mean, they have thought like, all right, everything is fine at linebacker. They don't, they don't need to continue pursuing other kids because they were fine at linebacker. Everyone seemed rock solid in their commitments until very recently. I mean, Dasan McCullough was apparently at the spring game 2 weeks ago. So this was not something that has been brewing for a long, long time. It just has all come together very quickly in the last couple of weeks. So they're a little kind of back-footed on this one, where they have not necessarily been pursuing linebackers. They've had a couple guys who would have been potentially decent fits to fill that spot commit elsewhere. One of them just committed to Georgia, for example. So there's still time. And the thing, if you're looking for something to be optimistic about for Ohio State, as soon as visits open up in June, like, everyone in the world is going to be visiting everywhere. So, Ohio State has plenty of time to get people on campus. You have the opportunity for, even if someone's committed somewhere else, if you can get them on campus, the odds are they probably haven't been on campus at the place they've committed to. Like, many of people have committed to schools without being on campus there. So if you can get someone on campus at Ohio State and they like their visit better than wherever they're committed to, obviously not easy opportunity for a flip there. But yeah, it is not a fantastic spot for Ohio State to be in, because this is not a position that, it's a spot that I think they see a lot of value in, but not one where there's a ton of people who can do what Dasan McCullough does.
Well, and to me, if we're talking about how he's going to be Baron Browning, that's also what Gabe Powers has talked about being, a linebacker who can rush as a rush end and can do both of those things. So maybe there's some redundancy there, because I don't see Dasan McCullough as an inside linebacker necessarily. And again, are we talking two inside linebackers and a ball? Is that Ohio State's base defense moving forward? Does that third linebacker, if he's Sam, also have to be able to drop back into coverage? And can Dasan McCullough do that? I mean, he's done it in high school, but that's a tough ask. I do think having CJ Hicks I think he's going to end up inside as like a will, because I think you want him as close to the ball as possible. Sure, he could do bullet stuff like that, but then you're taking him away from the ball. And I think, for me, he's like a slightly slower Ryan Shazier with a much better understanding of the position. Because if you go back to like Ryan Shazier, I think he was like a rush end and basically would just go attack the football. And CJ Hicks can do that, but he can also do other things that a linebacker is needed. So I just don't know, because Dasan McCullough is like kind of like a unicorn, but what purpose? Like what do unicorns do? I mean, they don't pull the wagon. They're not transportation. So it'd be like, throwing a jazz musician in the middle of Metallica. Yes, a jazz musician is very talented at what they do, but doesn't necessarily fit with Lars and, all of those guys. And for me, I just, obviously they wanted him. I wonder how much of it was, well, let's see what happens with him. Like, let's see where he ends up.
First of all, I think, sir, you are very clearly not familiar with the Symphony and Metallica album, because that is, it's not a jazz musician, but they have crossed genres with some commercial success before. So I would like you to apologize.
It's a jazz, though.
Yeah, I know, but they're crossing genres. They're talented.
Don't confuse jazz with symphony just because there's a lot of strange instruments, okay?
Just because they are different. Thank you.
And they have
You're
horns.
Welcome.
Yes, they're similarly there, but...
Yes, good. We're agreed then. And... Yeah, I think Dasan McCullough was a little bit of, maybe the vision of what they want this Ohio State team to turn into, where you've got the guys who used to be called tweeners now are people who fit a very specific role on this team, where, you used to look at someone like a Craig Young, for example, and be like, well, I don't know if he's big enough to be a linebacker, but I don't know if he's fast enough to be a safety. It's like, that's fine. There's a new position for that right now. It's called the bullet. And we're going to talk about it for 4 years, and then we're actually going to do it. And that may be sort of what they're looking at in terms of that other, in terms of development of other spots as well. I mean, and this goes back to like Sam Hubbard. Like, Sam Hubbard was recruited as a safety, came in, and everyone's like, he's going to be a linebacker. It's like, no, defensive end. And then he's going to be a really high NFL draft pick and play for the Bengals for a few years. And that may be kind of what they're looking at Dasan McCullough as being. You also have the, like, bring him in and see what his body does. Like, some guys will just come in and can hold a lot more weight and stay quick, and then they're killers at a position like one spot further down the defensive line than you might have expected otherwise. But he is a talented enough player, and I mean, obviously a very intelligent player, And, Alex Gleitman had him on his Around the Oval podcast at some point last summer, and a super intelligent, very likable kid. The kind of person who would be a real asset to any program he'd be in. So yeah, it is a loss, but it's not totally clear where exactly it represents a loss to Ohio State, whether that is a linebacker loss or a defensive end loss, or maybe something in between.
Yeah, I remember, I think Sam Hubbard, I think on his official visit, he said he was like 205. Javante Jean-Baptiste said he was 195 on his official visit.
Mm-hmm.
So there is evidence of these guys growing. But there's also evidence that when a guy decommits from Ohio State, it doesn't necessarily come back to kill them. It doesn't. Ohio State is what I'm saying. It doesn't hurt Ohio State as much as you'd think. And so I went through and put a list together. Most of this list was from 24/7 because they have a drop down for decommitments, but they didn't have all of them there. They had some missing, which is frustrating when you're trying to use something as an information source when they don't have all of the information. And so I actually had to do some other Googling, of which I found Alex Gleitman had a full list of the Urban Meyer decommitments while he was at 24/7, but it was only like 3 or 4 years worth because it was at like 2016 or something. So, I supplemented the two lists, and I went through, and there's 36 guys on this list. And of that 36, Tom, and I've got here like maybe 2 hurt, and those 2 are Clark Phillips and Jordan Battle. But I don't even know if Clark Phillips really hurt because that was 2020, and Ohio State had 2 freshman corners last year and they didn't play. Who's to say Clark Phillips would have played?
Well, Clark Phillips started for Utah, didn't he?
Yeah, but that's Pac-12.
I mean, Ohio State's defense looked pretty Pac-12 at times last year. So
fair point.
Yeah, I would add. I would definitely have Clark Phillips on that list. Jordan Battle obviously was starting for Alabama last year. I think Ohio State probably would have been more than happy to have Jordan Battle on there. I think Jaden Woodby. Jaden Woodby was a multi-year starter for Florida State.
But as a linebacker.
Yeah, but I think you could probably find a spot for him on the field. There are a few others on here that I think you could make an argument for, but yeah, there's a lot of it's interesting. There's a lot of guys on here who ended up transferring somewhere else after they got to college. Doug Nestor started at Virginia Tech. He's now at West Virginia.
Dwan
Mathis started at Georgia, had some real serious health issues, and is now at Temple. Danny Clark had a couple different hops. I think the last time I saw him, he was at a JUCO in Mississippi.
Tyjon Lindsey. Yeah,
Tyjon Lindsey went Nebraska to Oregon State and then somewhere else, I think, after that. Bruce Judson, his college football passport is full. He needs to get another one. And the other guy that I think might be arguable is Antoine Simmons. He was, again, a linebacker, but he was, wasn't he an all Big Ten guy at Michigan State? He was a
3-year starter or something like that.
A multi-year starter for Michigan State. He went to Pioneer High School, which is the high school that's like catty corner to Michigan Stadium. So he's in Ann Arbor, and then he first commits to Ohio State and then flips and commits to Michigan State. And, it was a very good college player. Linebacker was obviously not a real big position of need the last few years for the Buckeyes, but he would have been someone who absolutely would have contributed to those teams. But you're right. There's a lot of guys on here who, you go through, and there's not a lot of people who were like serious, what could have been people on that list. You mentioned Johnny Townsend before we started recording. Johnny Townsend, of course, was replaced by Cam Johnston, so that worked out just fine. But Johnny Townsend is I think he's an NFL. I think he's with the Raiders now, right? Or was a year or two ago. So that's a pretty good player. There are a couple names that, again, if you were an extremely online college football person from about 8 to 10 years ago, everyone will remember Kyle Kalis and the one unfortunate quote that he gave. But I'm going to say another name that you probably haven't thought of for quite a while that will trigger just like, oh Lord, that story. Alex Anzalone, and friends, if you know, you know.
Yes. Feel free to Google B-Dub's Trivia Guru if you want, or if you don't, it doesn't matter. But losing Johnny Townsend, Ohio State signs Cameron Johnson, which was great for them, better for us because there would be no Australian accent component to the show without Cameron Johnston being here, and until like now with Jesse Merkel being here. But so we've got. I'm glad that we didn't have to wait that long for that to be part of the show.
Or the chocolate thunder from down under.
It's so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Looking at like, some of these, a lot of these are Ohio State moving on. But there's every year has somebody like there's decommitments every single year. And usually it's more than one. Like last year was only 2, which was low. 2020 had 4, 2019 had 5, 18 had 4, 2017, which is just ridiculous, had 6, 2016 had 4, 2015 had 4, 2014 had 2, unless the information is wrong. And 2013 had 4, and then 2012. Like I could only find one. Didn't look too hard, and I already knew that one. But it would be amazing to me if there's only one the year that Urban Meyer takes over. But he did, like he kept everybody who was committed. Like he didn't send anybody packing. There's a lot of guys he could have sent packing, but if he would probably sent guys like Pat Elflein and guys who ended up as starters, these low-rated 3-star Ohioans. Like, yeah, we don't need you. We need to boost up. But I think Kyle Kalis was the only one from 2012 that I can remember, and it's unfortunate. And I was looking at some of his quotes yesterday or the day before, where he was talking about how he can't go to a program that's going to be part of NCAA infractions, and who knows how long it's going to take them to overcome that. He's got to go somewhere with a situation at a head coach that is firm, and where things are going. And boy,
when you look at Brady Hoke, the word you think is firm. Absolutely, exactly. Yeah. One other name that's kind of interesting is Brenton Cox, who's the defensive end who was committed to Ohio State in 2018, then flipped to Georgia. He was in 2018 was a 20 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, had a sack, and then didn't play in 2019. I can't remember if he got hurt or if he transferred, but then he ended up at Florida last year for 2020. Had 42 tackles, 10 for loss, 3.5 sacks. That's a guy who, again, this is not defensive end is not a position where Ohio State has been like hurting for depth. That's a guy who would have contributed for Ohio State probably too.
That 2017 class, Urban Meyer was just that. Tyjon Lindsey, Jake Moretti was a Colorado offensive lineman.
Yep.
Todd Sibley offered way too soon, offered as a true freshman year. I think that was after they won the national championship. Urban was just like high on life and offered Todd Sibley and Danny Clark and maybe Bruce Judson at that point as well, because Bruce Judson was like a 5-star athlete for whatever reason. And then eventually ends up like a 3-star that signs with UCF, but went 15 other places. And of course, Antoine Simmons, certainly the best of the bunch of the 2017, and they just let him go, basically.
Yeah, I mean, was Jake Moretti the one who hurt his knee? I think was he, I think there was an offensive lineman who hurt.
Well, he ended up going back home to Colorado.
Yeah,
play at Colorado.
Yeah, so, okay. Yeah, and there was another Jake Ray, 2020, who the younger brother of Max Ray, who just transferred. Jake Ray, again, was committed to Ohio State and ended up committing to Colorado ultimately. So multiple Colorado offensive linemen on this list, which is not a thing you would necessarily expect.
Did you see my pie chart from earlier in the week about Ohio State commitments that Tom Allen has stolen and Jim Harbaugh has stolen?
I did not, but I assume it was all one color.
Yes, all one color. 2 for Tom Allen with the recent news of Dasan McCullough, and then also running back Samson James in 2019. Now, some Ohio State commits have eventually committed to Jim Harbaugh, but not while they were committed to Ohio State. Just thinking some other names. Boy, there's some bullets dodged here. I mean, Tristan Wallace in 2016, I remember watching him at OSU's camp and being like, oh, okay. And then you see him in a high school game, he's like really bad against one of the best teams in the nation. I forget who it was. And then eventually he's like, you know what? I don't want to play quarterback anymore. I want to be a receiver. And I'm going to go to Oregon instead. And then eventually JUCO. But to be that far off on a quarterback, that's not good. And of course they remedied things sort of. I mean, the next year they got Tate Martell and Danny Clark. So clearly their assessments were better than the year before when they thought, you know what, let's take this guy who turns out doesn't really want to play quarterback. And you go back to like Urban Meyer's thoughts of the traits he looks for in quarterbacks, the winning, the toughness. And it's like, but this guy didn't even want to play the position. How did you fall into that?
I think there is probably an argument to be made that Ryan Day has slightly improved the quarterback evaluation and development at Ohio State. I think that may be my takeaway there, slightly.
Well,
I mean, you go through the list, the names on this list, and these are just the decommit guys. But you go through just the quarterback recruiting 2012 to 2017, and then what it's been since then. And it's like, okay, there's Braxton Miller, and JT Barrett was good, and Cardale Jones turned into a nice player, but like, there's a bunch of like, that's not fantastic. And to go from that to now, 5-star, 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 high 4-star. I mean, and guys are developing. I'm gonna say I think Ryan Day's decent at his job.
Well, let's transition then for the last thing we'll talk about today, and keep it with the Ohio State quarterbacks and what that means moving forward. We know obviously 3 guys who have never thrown a pass in college football before, and Kyle McCord and CJ Stroud and Jack Miller. And now one of these 3 or 2 of these 3 or 3 of these 3 will have to lead the Ohio State offense this season. So obviously there's a lot on their shoulders. And I wrote about this this week regarding can these guys just be game managers? Because they've got an offensive line that should be fine. The tackles are perfect in terms of what you would like for new starting quarterbacks. The running game, you got enough running backs to figure out something there. The receivers, obviously that talent is there. You've got a tight end and Jeremy Ruckert, who could be just a tremendous security blanket for whomever. So how far can these guys get how far can Ohio State get if they are just game managers? And I go back to JT Barrett, who clearly wasn't good enough to get Ohio State over the top, but I don't think he was a game manager. I think he was more of he was also a playmaker, because let's not forget some of the things he did against Michigan with some long runs and Penn State. Like, he made plays as well. And I don't know that he was necessarily accurate enough to be a game manager to receive that label. But he also did way more than just manage the game, because he's also a crucial short yardage runner. And so I don't know that he was that, but these guys, and as Ryan Day said, well, yeah, early on they'll be game managers, but eventually you got to be more than that. You've got to make plays. And I'm just wondering, Tom, how far Ohio State can get if they just have a game manager this year.
With a game manager at quarterback, you're still by far the most talented team in the Big Ten. Like, by far, you could throw out any of Ohio State's, pick your like middling Ohio State quarterback of the past, Craig Krenzel or Todd Beckman or sophomore year Braxton Miller. I mean, sophomore year Braxton Miller was exactly the opposite of this, because he was extremely inaccurate, but also extremely explosive. But, just guys who are somewhat limited in some way, who are not like absolute destroyers of worlds like Justin Fields has been the last couple of years. You can win the Big Ten with that, just because you're so much more talented than everyone else you're going to play. But then you cap out. Then it's like, okay, when the talent is equated, as they say, then what happens? And if you have a guy who's limited running your offense, like, that's when the party stops, and then you lose in the first round of the playoffs, or you lose a game at some point during the regular season and you end up in the Rose Bowl, and maybe you win you win the Rose Bowl, and like, that's a perfectly wonderful season, but it's not a national championship season. That's about where I think they end up. Now, I think that by the time the season develops, we'll just say it's CJ Stroud, because I think that's everyone's sort of default assumption for the season. If it's CJ Stroud has you have seen him run already. You saw him run against Michigan State. Like, he has the ability to, that was not a JT Barrett against Minnesota, where it's like, boy, that was the most exciting 17 seconds of an Ohio State football quarterback running down the field in the history of football. CJ Stroud has some wheels. CJ Stroud has a stronger arm than JT Barrett. The ceiling there is a lot higher with CJ Stroud. He has the opportunity to get there by the end of the season. So even if he is a game manager type at the beginning of the year, where it's like, okay, your job against Minnesota is to just not lose the game. Like, just kind of manage the game. Don't lose it. just distribute the ball to your talented playmakers outside. Let them, let Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Jeremy Ruckert work their magic out in space, and it'll be fine. That'll get you through the regular season. When you get to the playoffs, though, you got to be able to do a little more. And I think that whether it's him or Kyle McCord or Jack Miller, once you have a season under your belt, you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable. They have the arm, they have the speed, they have the mobility to make those kind of plays. So ultimately, I don't think that's where they're capped out in terms of a ceiling for this year. But if they don't advance past that game manager kind of level, that's about where the ride stops.
Yeah, and if you're going to have a game manager, you have to have an outstanding defense. And it's almost impossible to have a good enough defense to allow a game manager to win a national title for you. And you look back to like Alabama, what Nick Saban used to have game managers, and then he's like, you know what, I'm tired of this, and I'm going to go get 5-star guys, and they will then help the offense, because you can't hold teams to 12 points a game, 13 points a game anymore. And I think the 2007 Ohio State team led the nation in points allowed at like 12 or 13 or something. That's never going to happen again. And now you may have some teams that do it, but that they don't have. They're doing it in other ways than just defense. They're doing it with playing in a bad conference, or they're slowing the game down, trestle ball, if you will. Maybe that's why the 2007 team had such a good defensive success. But you've got to score points. And I'm looking at Ohio State's schedule. Is a game manager going to win at Indiana, Tom?
Probably yes.
What about at Nebraska?
Probably yes.
At Rutgers?
I'm thinking. Yeah, you go down the list, and it's like Ohio State plays good teams, but there's just such a stratification in the sport right now that it's like, yeah, Alabama plays good teams too, but Alabama still, no matter whether they're at home or on the road, has far better talent than anyone they're playing during the regular season this year. It's the same thing for Ohio State. The talent level is so much higher at Ohio State. Like even the weeks when Ryan Day says the talent is equated during the regular season, it's not actually equated. It's like, okay, the talent is somewhat closer against Penn State than it was against Rutgers. That doesn't mean it's the same. You can look at any metric you want to use, whether it's star rankings of starters or total star rankings of your depth, your whole roster. It's like, yes, Penn State's pretty good. And then there's a huge chasm. And then there's Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. Like there is just a real top tier. And this is, this should not come as a surprise to you, but there's just a huge chasm there. And that's not necessarily great for the sport, but it's pretty good for Ohio State.
And what's good for Ohio State is best for the sport. I think everybody knows that. Tom, as the train goes on behind me, is there anything else you wanted to touch on with these quarterbacks or with Ohio State's offense? I know we're gonna spend some time on it this summer. The next show we'll actually talk about a little bit about some Michigan stuff and maybe do some comparing there.
Boy, and there is some Michigan stuff to talk about. Ooh, it is not fantastic there. One thing I do want to make a quick point to you that the last 3 national championship games, and I'm just going to run through the winning team scores from each of the college football national championship games. Ready? 42, 45, 35, 26. That was the Alabama-Georgia game that was real close, where Alabama only played the correct quarterback for about half the game. 44, 42, 52. Like, this is why Nick Saban is going away from game managers, because you are not going to win a national championship with a Craig Krenzel quarterback now. Like, no one can play defense that well because the offenses are too good. So you have to kind of outscore. Like, you need a good defense to keep the opponent in the 20s or the low 30s when you're scoring 42. But you got to score. You essentially just have to go in assuming you're going to have to score 40 points to win the national championship game. And you need a quarterback who's good enough to put up 40 points on Alabama or Clemson or Georgia or Oklahoma. Well, okay, Oklahoma's not a good example, but any of the good defenses that you might have to play in a national championship game. you've got to be able to score 40 points against them in order to probably actually expect to win.
And the scary thing is, neither Dwayne Haskins or Justin Fields were good enough to win a national championship at Ohio State, the two best quarterbacks in school history, and they couldn't get it done. So what chance do CJ Stroud, Jack Miller, or Kyle McCord have? None, Tom.
I'm not sure I'd put last year's non-national championship win entirely on Justin Fields' shoulders. I don't think he was in coverage on Devontae Smith.
Yeah, because he's not good enough.
Yeah, I stand corrected.
Thank you. A show first. I love it. Okay, I guess that'll do it for us. Before we go, though, Thursday, BuckeyeScoop.com on the Ask the Insiders board, a huge, crazy blowout. I believe Bill Green will still be doing his weekly chat. It's draft day. Nevada Buck, his four wise men they're all going to be chatting all day long as well. So there's going to be a whole big to do on the Ask the Insiders board. Any kind of recruiting questions, Ohio State history, Ohio State ins and outs, stories you've heard that you want verified, things that, just anything that you could possibly want. All day long on Thursday, put it on the message board, and it will get addressed by some very knowledgeable insiders from all, walks of the Woody and Ohio State. And I'm looking forward to it. It should be, Tom, pretty special day here.
Yeah, and I think Nevada Buck is a source of a lot of mystery and excitement and interest, just because he always has the information. And it's like, how does he do that? The answer to how he does that is he knows these people. And these people who we never get a chance to talk to, who I've never spoken to, I'm sure you've never spoken to, they will actually be answering questions. I am super interested in that. That will be on our Ask the Insiders board. So you do have to become a member of BuckeyeScoop.com in order to access that. So, hey, we talk about all the time how much this would be a great time to join BuckeyeScoop.com. Like, of all of the times to join BuckeyeScoop.com, this might be the best one. So, throw a little money at it. Just do as I have said on the Morning Scoop before, it is the price of a crappy chain store pizza. So instead of giving yourself heartburn with a side of garlic sauce, like give yourself a month of BuckeyeScoop.com. See if you like it, because it seems like with the recruiting visits opening up, transfer portal stuff probably about to explode. It seems like this is going to be a fascinating offseason, and our insiders have it covered in a way that pretty much no one else does. So you can find that all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Sign up for membership today, and then you get access to that insiders board and a bunch of other great stuff as well. Yeah,
sign up for a month, and then if you forget that you renewed the following month, just keep it through June, because June is going to be absolutely crazy with the visits opening up. So there will be all kinds of information there as well. Guys are going to be committing. You'll want to know about it first. The Ask the Insiders board is a great place to find all of that. So, it's going to be a big week here in a big few months, a big year, big couple of years, big decade, just moving forward. So if you are not yet a member, feel free to become one. I promise you will enjoy it. Tom, that'll do it for the show. We'll have another one later in the week. Yeah, go ahead.
One other thing we should mention, if you're sitting there thinking, I will wait until memberships go on sale for 17 cents for a year. Friends, we do not do that. We do not do that at all, because that is not fair to our existing members. So the price of the membership is not going to change. So if you want to wait for a sale, that's fine, but you're going to be waiting for quite a while, like the heat death of the universe, probably. So, if you want to do it, this is the time to do it. You're not, the deal's not getting any better. And this kind of event is probably not going to happen more than once a year, I would guess, at the most. So that would make this a good time to do it, is all we're saying.
Yeah. And I believe it's been a few years, maybe more than a few years since this has happened. So it'll be a big day. I'm looking forward to it. Everybody should check it out. So that will do it. Thank you all for listening, and thank you guys for watching, and we will talk to you on Thursday.